Welcome back to this sixth panel at the 8th Belgrade NATO Week. I'm Jorgen Samso, and it's my pleasure to be moderating this panel titled Serbia 2025. What about foreign policy, security, and defense? And in this panel, we have four speakers. We don't have, unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, the Minister for EU Integration, Jadranka Joksimović, has had to cancel her appearance here. But we have with us His Excellency Ambassador Sem Fabrizi, the head of the delegation of the European Union to the Republic of Serbia. We have Tania Lațici, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, policy analyst for EU security and defense policy at the European Parliamentary Research Services. We have Aleksandar Simurdić, vice president for the European movement in Serbia. Dr. Duško Tomić, professor and program director for master and doctoral studies of security and global affairs at the American University in Dubai. Welcome to all of you, and thanks for joining us. Just to briefly introduce the topic for this panel, which is the strategy that Serbia adopted in 2029, Serbia 2025, which among other things defines Serbia militarily as a neutral country. This definition raises questions about, on the one hand, the Serbian commitment to obtaining EU membership, and on the other, the prospect of having to align itself with EU foreign policy, security, and defense strategies. We have touched upon this issue in other panels, but in this panel, we will zoom in and focus on Serbia 2025 strategy, and also how it plays into EU-NATO relations, transatlantic relations, and finally, I hope also vis-a-vis the NATO 2030 strategy that seeks to strengthen the political dimension of the alliance. A question I hope we can use maybe as a launch pad for the conversation is how well the Serbian public is informed about the distinction between political and military neutrality. And here we're lucky that we have the result from the latest CEAS poll. This is us, Serbia 2020, that was launched here yesterday. And I'd like to just sum up a few numbers from the poll. 50% of the Serbian population would vote in favor of EU accession, according to this poll. 46% of Serbian citizens would continue with EU integration if the EU were to become a supranational entity with binding defense policies. 29% of the population would abandon EU integration in that regard. And in regard to current cooperation with NATO, 47% of the population is neutral, 40% positive towards the current cooperation with NATO, and a third, 33%, sees the cooperation as negative. We have about 90 minutes set for this panel, and I should mention that we will not have a Q&A session, only the conversation and discussion among the panelists. Also, I should quickly remind the audience that both on YouTube and Zoom, it's possible to choose either translation to Serbian or English on the globe icon on the bottom right of the screen, the bottom right corner of the screen. And I'd also like to thank the translators who are with us, who are doing a great job so far. Thanks for that. And with that, it's my pleasure to give the floor to His Excellency Ambassador Sem Fabrizi. Mr. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Jorgen, and thank you all of you for being here. I hope you see me clearly and listen clearly. I think we all are trying to have our own studio set at home. We are trying to set the right lights. I hope you. I see myself a little bit in the darkness, but it's. I'm trying to do my best. So it's a great pleasure to be here and being again a participant in this NATO week. Right now, it's eight session. Maybe a couple of few comment of. Somehow of introductory measures. I mean, in the sense, I think one of the elements of the NATO week is to bring the focus back on security and defense as an element of the conversation. Certainly, from our point of view as EU, we see the enlargement as such, as an as an investment in democracy, in prosperity, but certainly also an investment in security. And if you also look at the latest policy position of Serbia, when we talk about the national defense strategy released last year, which is a security strategy by Serbia, and the question of national interest is identified. The EU accession is an element of national interest for Serbia. So in that sense, we both speak the same language. We both have the same understanding. Certainly, you make in your panel quite an interesting question between military neutrality and political neutrality, which is a very interesting question. I think nobody will say, certainly not as a European Union, questioning Serbian military neutrality. I think this is a sovereign decision and it's a decision that we all respect. Certainly, political neutrality is something different, and we don't have to confuse the two. We are a union who is not politically neutral. We have our own clear set of values and interests, and I think is a call certainly for Serbia in acceding to the European Union converge with this political line of the European Union. If we just take the big debate on multilateralism, certainly the EU is upholding, promoting the multilateralism as a tool, as an objective, and certainly Serbia joining the European Union converge on the same element. If I make an example certainly on the GPCOA with Iran, Serbia has been certainly supportive of the EU effort to find a multilateral approach. So I think it's important to clarify since the beginning what is neutral neutrality, fine. What is political neutrality, which is different. Certainly, Europe is not. Second point is basically how we operate on the security side with Serbia. I think we have a number of instruments that we have been using within the EU and outside. So I don't have to go too much in detail. What is our common foreign security policy, our common and defense policy, and this instrument has been open to Serbia. And I think if you also look from only from these numbers, Serbia is among the first, or if not the first, non-EU countries in contributing to our own mechanism. So Serbia has joined a number of military operations of the EU, basically in Africa, especially in Mali, Republic of Central Africa. Serbia is part of some of our military mechanism, the battle group, the Helbrok battle group between Greece, Bulgaria, and Serbia is part of the battle group. Serbia has nearly 28 military personnel embedded in the EU policies. Serbia is part of Atalanta operation. So there's let's say, just to flag, there is a number of elements where Serbia is already being part, and certainly already give the sense that our conversation, our tools in security are being established. Certainly, there's a strong encouragement for our side to go more. The other element is EU-NATO relation. I think has been already clarified by some of my colleagues in the introductory remark. For us, NATO is a key partner. After Berlin Plus, we have established with with NATO a number of successful operation. The Warsaw Declaration in 2016 has identified a number of other important issues. So for us, the NATO is a pillar, a strong element of our security outlook, and certainly NATO continue to play important role in the Western Balkans. Just to make it, if you have to think about KFOR in NATO in Kosovo, NATO is a security provider in the region, and certainly an increasing cooperation from our side will be certainly continued. What we see that, of course, when we talk about, you made some polls, everybody has its own polls, but in any case, it's useful to have some feeling from the people. EU and NATO are two different organizations, they are two different institutions. NATO is a military alliance, we are in union, so it's a different, let's say, outlook. And I think one former Director General of the military staff in Brussels said that the EU focuses on changing on society, while NATO has a more as objective military alliance and military defeat. So I think the objectives are different because different are the purposes of our conversation. Certainly, and it will be my last point. The whole global outlook is increasing a pressure on EU to make his role as a global player more sharp, more defined, and more clear. This is one of the big debate we are having in Brussels, in the so-called sovereign autonomy, whatever it might mean, is a concept, but where the EU is taking a need to take a larger role. Of course, there will be a strong element of complementarity with NATO, but certainly the EU is pushed by the global outlook to take more responsibility on foreign security and defense policy. So in that, let's say, in that sense, we need to increase cooperation, and I spoke to my Serbian friend. We need to increase the cooperation between EU and Serbia. There's an important instrument, as I said, on CFSP, CSSDP. Serbia would like also to participate in our civilian mission. This is certainly a positive element. We have accredited in Serbia first, I would say, the first military attaché that the EU has deployed outside the borders of the EU is in Serbia with the regional mandate. So we want to increase the military to military cooperation, and also, and it will be my last point, the PESCO, so the structure foreign cooperation that's been developing in Europe over the next few years, has in the past weeks decided to open its own structural cooperation to third countries. And certainly Serbia as a close partner, as ally, a country in accession, is certainly a country where an increased mil-to-mil, military-to-military cooperation need to be there. So I will conclude saying that, just to recap, military neutrality, no doubt. Political accession to the EU is not political neutral, is a converge on a setting of values of interest, and developing your relation with the third countries freely, but within these boundaries of these values and interests defined together. There are instruments already existing in the EU foreign policy, which already Serbia is part, and increasing, we are encouraging Serbia to be part of it. And EU, last point, being called to have a major role, and a more important role in foreign and defense policy globally, should increase their role, and Serbia as an acceding country should converge with this outlook, with this ambition. I will close here. Back the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador, for putting things nicely into context, and also for giving us the vision of a more global outlook, and also some of these distinctions, clarifying some of these distinctions that we're discussing here. I think with that, I would hand the microphone over to Tania Lațici for her opening remarks in this panel.
Thank you so much. Well, before I begin, I'd like to say that just the feeling of being virtually with you in Belgrade brings me so much closer to home, much closer than I am here in Brussels. Because although by passport I'm Romanian, I'm actually Romanian from the Serbian minority in Romania, from the border region with Serbia. And actually, you completely mispronounced my name, which everyone does, so that's okay. But if I tell you that my name is actually Tania Lațici, maybe that will ring a Serbian bell. So thank you for bringing me close to home, first of all. Now, the ambassador already touched upon some of the points that I also wanted to make, but hopefully I'll try to be as complementary as possible, like the EU is with NATO, you know, in the same spirit. So I'll briefly talk about three things. First, the EU, then NATO, and then opportunities for Serbia in both. So first, the EU. Now, as we know, and as already the ambassador mentioned, the EU has worked quite a lot in the last years to articulate and to slowly implement a vision for so-called strategic autonomy or strategic sovereignty. There's several terms being floated around. But so this means, as the ambassador said, to be more capable, to be more self-reliant in areas such as security and defense, but also much more broadly than that. So also in digital terms, in terms of climate change, in terms of trade, and so on. Now, from the very beginning, the vision of strategic autonomy, of a strategically autonomous Europe, implied working with partners. There should be absolutely no doubt about that, because this is really the European way of doing it. Now, on the implementation side, the EU developed tools such as the European Defence Fund and such as PESCO, which, as was mentioned, are, as of quite recently, open to third country participation. But I'll come back to that at the end. Now, on the more strategic side, the EU is undergoing quite a strategic soul-searching moment, if we can name it as such. So it's basically undergoing a process called the Strategic Compass, which is aiming to better define the EU's strategic aims, to identify the means of achieving them, and to identify the overarching guiding purpose of its strategic aims. So this strategic compass has started now rather recently under the German presidency of the EU and is set to last for about 2 years. In 2022, it will be finalized. Now, I can guarantee you that the strategic importance of the Balkans is part and parcel of this process. And I can give you an example. I myself was part of a foresight, quite a scenario building exercise, and my scenario was the Western Balkans. So I can confirm that the geostrategic importance of the region doesn't escape anyone. So that was on the EU. Now on NATO. So I think NATO also realized much more in the last years that it needs to look much more holistically to the security challenges it faces. And again, this includes working with partners. As was already pointed out, one such partner is obviously the EU. I won't go deep into the EU-NATO relationship because I know it was discussed already in other panels, but also previously. But I will just say that they have indeed deepened their cooperation to a truly unprecedented level. Whenever I speak about, where I give talks about EU-NATO cooperation, I like to liken them to two stray cats, which before used to, look at each other quite suspiciously from two different sides of Brussels, not really interacting that much, basically following the same distinction that the ambassador pointed out, this division of labor, that the EU is responsible for ensuring the economic and socioeconomic prosperity of the continent, while NATO is responsible for the military hardcore defense side. Well, this is changing. This is changing not only as the EU is taking more defense responsibilities, but also because the nature of defense is changing. what counted as defense contributions or defense preparedness 10 years ago doesn't count as such today. And this is, again, one impetus for more EU-NATO cooperation. So they have, since 2016, as it was pointed out, they've outlined quite a rich shopping list of common areas of interest that where they have to cooperate more. And one of them is clearly stability, security, and prosperity in the Balkans. This is very, very clear. Now, NATO itself is also undergoing a moment of strategic soul searching. I think it was already mentioned through the NATO 2030 process. And I'm happy to go a bit deeper into that if there's interest, because I actually have a small leg into that pool as well, because I've been one of the 14 young leaders appointed by the section to be part of the process. So I'm happy to give you more insight in that. But so to move on now to what everyone here wants to hear about. So what for Serbia? And this is my final point. I think it's a truly no-brainer to say that Serbia is Europe, conceptually and territorially. So I think there's much more space for more interconnectedness. And this doesn't have to mean huge leaps straight into the accession treaty. It can simply mean strengthening the foundation of the relationship with the EU. And this is best done through common projects, as simple as that. So Serbia can, for instance, mobilize its very strong startup industry and its immense pool of talent to better link up with projects in the European Defence Fund. As was already pointed out by the ambassador, it can already enter talks, formal or informal, with PESCO members to identify projects of mutual interest that are currently being undergoing or that are in the pipeline in the discussion. There's nothing to stop it from entering such discussions, especially now that we have the conditions established. On the NATO side, I think there's also quite a lot of room for proactivity as regards NATO. Now, I've also looked at the survey that you mentioned, and two things struck me. One is the ones that are neutral and the ones that are against or that seem quite negative, the partnership between Serbia and NATO. The other one is the fact that the majority don't get any information about NATO unless they get it from their friends and family. And these people are our target. This is our target. So civil society engagement, awareness raising, and engaging in particular the millennials and the Gen Zers who didn't go through the war in the same way as the previous generation did, who didn't go through that, and who are much more connected with other Europeans, whether be it through the internet or being through internships and Erasmus exchanges. This is how we grew up. This is our target, and we need to engage them through smart communication because they will sniff out immediately the propaganda type communication. So it needs to be genuine, smart communication. And finally, Serbia could engage formally, but also informally in the EU's strategic compass and the NATO 2030. Again, there's nothing stopping it from doing that, from engaging with those policy officers in the different ministries and at the EU or NATO staff level. There's nothing stopping it from engaging with them. Targeted diplomacy can really go a long way. So to sum up, I think there's much more that brings us together than what separates us. And finally, I think the journey to 2025 is as important or perhaps even more important than the destination of 2025 itself. Step by step and project by project, this is how we'll get there. Thank you.
Thank you, Tania. And yeah, I'm glad we also got clarified the pronunciation of your last name and your rootedness here in Serbia. I think you very nicely used some nice metaphors for describing how NATO and the EU are in some moment, the soul-searching moments, and about them being stray cats and now maybe moving into each other's territory slowly, bouncing back and forth maybe, and trying to figure out who's going where. And I think also you pointed out nicely that there's a lot of room for making the information gap smaller, and a lot of room there for public diplomacy, and also mentioning and encouraging or talking about the youth and how that that plays an important role in the future about communication about these topics. And I think I would like to give it over to our next speaker, which is Aleksandar Simurdić, Vice President from the European Movement in Serbia.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me and see me, and I would like to thank the Center for invitation. I'm glad that we are here today, that we can at least speak to each other and see each other. It's important for this dialogue to flow and to talk about issues from the point of view of Serbia and Western Balkan region. I will build on what Tania said at the end, that the journey is more important than the destination. And this raises the issue whether in the past 10 years, we in the Western Balkans, whether we have understood and accepted what the essence is, whether we have understood that the essence is not the goal, that the goal is transformation of society in Western Balkans, that negotiation framework in our hands is the instrument to get to the goal, and the institutions, not individual system rather than anarchy. And if we had achieved this, we would have been less concerned what European or more or less skeptical European officials are saying about this. So now the global frameworks are leaving this area in the periphery of global trends, and the future of these processes that we are talking about lies in the stronger regional cooperation. If we wish to try to slow down, we cannot stop, obviously, but if we want to slow down negative demographic trends that Europe and the world is facing, but not because of the same causes, also the Western Balkan region is facing them. In the invitation, it was the future of regional integration was mentioned, the financial market and education and so on. I want to talk about that, to see where regional processes can take us. And when we talk about regional processes from the point of view of Serbia and other Western Balkan societies, we have to be aware of performance in globally and the new global order that we are witnessing. Performance that says that Western Balkan societies have fewer population, smaller population than Romania, that we have 1 percentage point participating in Europe. So we have to be fully aware of that when we talk about regional initiatives. So when we talk about strategic commitment of the government of Serbia, the full membership, the train to Brussels goes through our neighbors' yards, and in that light, the building of mini Schengen or other integrations through joint regional market and new steps that we saw in the past few days is so the joint declaration of the government of Albania, Northern Macedonia, and Serbia was signed ahead of Sofia summit, and within the region, so the regional market initiative as well. So these are complementary initiatives. They do not exclude each other, and this raises the issue how we can frame them and put them on joint foundations. This kind of small region doesn't have the luxuries to talk about separate processes. Joint regional market and mini Schengen. We have to find a way how we can shape this, frame this, how they complement each other, to see the differences, and we need to see how to approach them and to have a common regional platform. All these segments of all these initiatives that were discussed, that you mentioned this morning with the president of the Chamber of Commerce, these bridges, railway tracks and so on, these are not just symbolic. They do present a basis for economic development, improvement of competitiveness of the whole region, economies, companies in the Western Balkans, energy, transport elements, digital connectedness. So they are at the top of regional initiatives. Identical challenges are faced by citizens in all the countries of the Western Balkan: corruption, unemployment, bad economic situation, brain drain. And in that respect, deeper, stronger, more intensive, more concrete cooperation can bring a lot. One region, one economy, single information and innovation area. I would be happy to talk about concrete parameters of integrations, but what I see as key barriers to further economic development of the region is the rule of law, judiciary, fight against corruption, freedom, media pluralism, and additionally, key is the issue of confidence, trust among societies, economic cooperation that is based on mutual interest, that requests mutual trust within the region. That's the right path towards economically stronger West Balkans, and we have to be ready to accept this and implement it with resolution. Regional initiatives. Why? And I'll end by saying that the region finally will get an opportunity to speak with a single voice on key circumstances, to show to the audience and public opinions that the Balkans is not just part of a problem, that it can be part of a solution. And there is no dilemma whether Western Balkans belongs at the table in the Brussels. This is the only way, the only path it must take, and the success of this process will depend on the readiness of both sides, the Western Balkans on the one side and the European Union on the other side, to understand and accept that it's not them and us, and the goal must be common. The Balkans at the table, reflecting on its own future. Otherwise, I'm afraid that everything else keeps us in the vicious circle where we spent for 20 years. The Balkan is simulating integration. Europe is simulating that it is enlarging, and this leads to fatigue, enlargement fatigue, that irrational state. And we know that we have to find a new narrative in the region of the Western Balkans. In 2020, it is clear that there will be no enlargement into Western Balkan countries in this mandate, in this term of office. And then this will be a major challenge for both sides, how to keep the European idea alive.
Thank you very much, Aleksandar, for this overview and also for pointing out some some trends or some topics that are very important for this for the Western Balkans as we move ahead. And I think you touched upon some good key barriers that you mentioned about rule of law, fight against corruption, and to also to build up the trust in society, and the regional initiatives that you also mentioned, the mini Schengen as a recent development that we have seen here that makes, I think, some promises for the future. With that, I would like to turn it over to Mr. Duško Tomić, who is with us from, I'm not sure where you are. You're in Dubai. Mr. Tomić, the floor is yours.
I'm not in Dubai. I'm just now in Belgrade.
Oh yeah, I see it now that it says Belgrade School of something. So you're with us here from Belgrade, but welcome.
I assume you've given me the floor. I want to greet all the participants of the NATO week. Sorry, I didn't catch all that. NATO officials maybe see this perspective differently about what will be happening in the future, unlike the people who professionally deal with politics. We are asking the questions at the bank whether we will be able to adapt to new circumstances, whether the organization of whether concepts like the European Union and NATO will be modeled or changed in the future. So some things depend on that, like the commitment of France and Germany in the concept of so the UK left the European Union, but it applied the 5-5 system. Russia and China are there are also conflicts between between India and Pakistan. Turkey intensified its presence in the Black Sea and led to a dangerous polarization of relations with Greece and France. Intelligence operations became non-intelligence operations. There's been a spread of lies and disinformation. This has increased during the pandemic. The classic forms of terrorism became form-brown terrorism. Security systems are not as adaptable as they should be. And they're starting to accuse others for their own letdowns. So how can a NATO member such as Turkey, how can it lead proxy wars in other territories and apply formations that are close to something else? So all this leads us to ask what the situation is right now in the world, whether we are aware of what's happening. I want to say that the Republic of Serbia is very aware of this environment right now. From the economic standpoint, it started an initiative that fully made it closer to the European Union, which is something that is mini Schengen. And in that perspective, Serbia is trying to approach European integration, to approach the European Union, to show that it is undoubtedly on this path towards the EU. On the other hand, relative to relations with NATO, the base will move soon from Turkey to Romania. Romania and Serbia are two countries which have a history of good relations, and of course, in this strategic environment, Serbia will always be a stable partner of Romania in all its activities. But come on, what should we do for NATO to promote itself and better relations? So something that Ms. Lațici said, this relationship with younger generations, and by displaying the extent to which NATO is interested in helping the Republic of Serbia. In last NATO week, we mentioned the initiative that has been started by the German and Serbian governments, which is cleaning up the Danube from the remainders of the German fleet from the Second World War, because a part of the Danube is not traversable because of this, and the Danube is a strategic link in Europe. So in all these relations, I think that in the future we need to, after the agreement in the US, we can count on the fact that Serbia is a stable factor, and as such, Serbia should be seen as a stable factor. But I again want to say that many perceptions happening in the modern world can be initiated and the answers can be given in a faster way. You have a situation where a NATO member which trained ISIS members who performed terrorist acts in Vienna. So you have this level of intelligence and counterintelligence cooperation, and you can let this cooperation be used not just among the EU member states, but also among NATO states with members of Partnership for Peace. And the level of intelligence cooperation should be completed and encouraged with countries that are not members of NATO. They should be trusted, and their intelligence data should be presented and taken better. They used to say that the former Yugoslav countries, that there were some explosives that are used in terrorist acts in Spain or Paris, but the countries in the Balkans shared the information about this weaponry with others, and the level of fight against terror and everything that is surrounding us would be improved if these countries were trusted. And know that Serbia will always be a part of this complex security mechanism that is always on the side of justice and on the side of those who protect human life, human liberty, economic development, and stability of countries in the world. This is what I have to say for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tomić. I think I would like, I don't know if we still have the ambassador with us. I don't see him on the screen, but oh, you're still here. I don't know if you were, I assume you were following. So I don't know if you have any comments or remarks to what we just heard here in the opening remarks from the panelists.
I think it's interesting that we are basically, if I well understood everybody, we have a converging views on or similar views, say, where we are going, and I think it's interesting how we basically recognize especially with what Tania said. I mean, I don't know if we have to call it soul searching, but it's a question of, I mean, for us, the NATO remain a pillar of the security. but certainly the evolving global outlook push everybody to take a reality check on what is there. So maintaining the differences, maintaining the complementarity, maintaining also from element. We have a number of countries in the EU who are not part of NATO, who have a military neutrality, Austria, Sweden, and others. So maintaining some, let's say, principle there, I think it's possible to join, at least from our point of view, the idea that in the contemporary world, there's a responsibility on security should be shared among a number of players. Certainly, the EU should be one of these. So, in that sense, I believe the European Union is making a great effort. Sometimes are not particularly, let's say, brought to the attention maybe of the general public, but I would say that starting from the global strategy of 2016, the launch which put the big question on where the EU is, because the previous, let's say, analysis was made by Solana 10 years ago, and if you read the 2009 strategy, was never been the EU living in a more prosperous, 2008, sorry, never been the EU living in a more prosperous, more secure, more stable society. And after 2008, 2009, the financial crisis, migration, Arab Spring, Crimea, so it's been a very, very eventful, to say the least, decade. So I think there, from that point of view, is I found this conversation quite interesting in the way we can bring to the attention of a Serbian larger audience. Of course, this is a little bit a conversation for experts, but if we can bring on the fore also this important element of the EU as a security provider, and as Serbia acceding the EU, being part of this larger conversation on a convergence. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I'm a journalist, so a lot of times I think about, we often talk about influence of Russia here in Serbia. We talk about China, and we cannot not talk about that when we're talking about the EU and NATO, and we're talking about security and defense strategies. So with that, I think maybe just a broad question on how do you as this group of experts see this this balancing act that Serbia is doing in this like great power competition that's that we think is unfolding here in the region? How do you see that panning out, and where are we in this moment in time with that? Also, I think maybe we could bring in what we're all in the middle of now, the pandemic. How has that power competition played out in the beginning of the pandemic, and where are we now today? I think I would start with maybe go over to Mr. Tomić for that.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak again. The relations with the Russian Federation, with China, and the relations with the European Union and NATO, primarily the United States, are the basic priority of the Republic of Serbia in any form. What does this mean? Serbia is committed to a policy of military neutrality, but also balancing policy. As such, in this moment, it is balancing in its relations with the United States and with the European Union and the Russian Federation and China. in such a sphere of relationships, Serbia has a balancing policy. Other countries in the world also have this. So where I live, the Emirates, there's also a balancing policy towards the United States as a strategic partner and extremely quality relations with China, with which it has signed a petrol agreement, and also the Saudi Arabia. You have other countries in the world which attempt to have this equivalent of relations with all actors. But I think that Mr. Samso, I think that the observation of many is wrong if you think that Serbs are little Russians. We have never been little Russians, nor will we ever be Russians, because we are a very proud people that loves its own country and its own way of thinking and its form of action. And those that are in the immediate environment and who cooperate with us, they know, and Mr. Fabrizi knows also, Serbia has always been a reliable partner. And why do I say this? If you, among others, ask anyone who, when the migrant crisis started, you can ask anyone who did the metric analysis of data on everyone who passed through the Republic of Serbia on the path to Europe. Though there were other European member states and NATO countries, the first country that started doing these analyses was Serbia, and it selflessly shared its data with Frontex, the European Union, and all countries in the environment. Serbia can recognize the security challenges and the situation in the region, and it is trying to be very flexible in with this struggle against the COVID. I have to say that if there is a system that existed in the fight against the pandemic and these so-called CBRN agents, all these plans started to kind of dissipate with time, because the countries themselves cannot give a high-quality response to this, because they are working according to patterns that used to be the way in which we organized ourselves. But you need to adapt to a crisis. The crisis is you can manage a balancing policy with one party and the other party, and if you know how to manage this crisis, you will have reliable results in crisis response and in the crisis that is imposed on you. At this moment, we have the capacity. I'm not referring to just the Republic of Serbia. When I say we, I think Europe has the capacities to deal with this pandemic and to come out as smarter as we can from all of this. On the other hand, we also have to think about a higher level of security cooperation. I'm saying this again. Maybe you don't like that, but security cooperation entails a scope of information which will be shared among all actors, and the reduction of the space where things can be done in the cybersphere. So everyone started dealing with their own agendas and spreading their own propaganda in the cybersphere. So the asymmetric warfare occurred in this cybersphere, this hybrid warfare, which is not characteristic of the times behind us. And this kind of cyber warfare, that is hybrid warfare, will be developed more and more in the relations in the modern world, because among other things, COVID-19 has showed us that a failure to take certain comprehensive activities in the fight against the pandemic contributed to countries locking each other out, not sharing information with each other, or not processing information in the right way. So this is something that we have to understand. We are living in a time of fast information processes and changes, and if we don't understand this, as our colleague member of the Serbian national minority in Romania said, so we have to assume that younger generations did not learn in the way that we are learning. The younger generations now learn on Facebook and Twitter and other social media and ways of communication. We have to be present in all of these channels, in all of these ways of communication and cooperation, and we need to exchange information. I hope I was not too comprehensive here.
No, your points are greatly appreciated. I don't think I was trying to imply, just to quickly make a rebound on that, that the Serbs are what you called little Russians. I don't think I was trying to say that. I was trying to open the arena for a discussion for influences of China and influences of Russia in the Western Balkans, and particularly in Serbia. So just to get that note, I think the Mr. Ambassador would like to take the floor. The floor is yours.
Certainly, I agree with the previous speaker that Serbia is a reliable country. I don't think anybody who knows Serbia can have any doubt on this. We saw in also in the area of migration, area of security. We have been working very closely hand in hand. Maybe as again to stress some a general point of view. Is that Serbia has free in a total sovereign decision decided to join the European Union. So it's a free choice, and of course we encourage, and certainly this choice also bring the idea of Serbia not only cooperating closely with the EU also on security and defense, but also to, upon accession, having a full convergence of Serbian foreign policy with the instrument of the EU. So this is a natural, consequences of a free choice. As I said before, relation with the third countries, any one of the 27 has a relation, strategic or less strategic, with the third countries. This is not the point. It's not question of a zero-sum game, and I have a relation with the one, but I don't have, which means that I don't have relation with the other. So we call it that you join the EU because of the European Union value of interest, against someone else. So this is why is the whole concept of the European Union. On the pandemic, your question, I would say that we all been taken by surprise by this virus at the beginning of the year. So it was also normal and also understandable that we have been trying to find the right approach. But I think immediately afterwards, I would say that all the possible mechanisms were deployed. And certainly the relation, I would say the relation between the EU and Serbia and the Western Balkans in general after the pandemic is paradoxically is closer than was before. A number of mechanisms has been put in place. Serbia right now is permanently part of a number of health mechanisms that didn't exist before for non-EU countries. Make an example. We made a joint procurement agreement to buy medicine and products. Before is a system was only for the 27, and after the March and April has been open to the Balkans, and right now Serbia is part of the mechanism for buying together a number of medicine. So this is an element to say that let's look at the reality of the fact. and look at how we are joining the forces to do this together. So from that point of view, I would say the pandemic has been a test for all of us. EU, it's been a stress test for the EU. I think the EU is delivering within the EU and within, of course, our own close partners in Serbia. Is so in that sense, I would say with all the difficulties that we all have, I think is a positive story.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I think I would like to play it over to Tania and see if you have anything to add to this. Some of the points that came up here. I saw you were taking notes.
Yes, sure. Always things to add. Maybe first a quick reaction to Mr. Tomić on. He said, I think in his initial intervention that. Or he discussed whether NATO is interested in helping Serbia, if I understood correctly, because I used interpretation. My Serbian is unfortunately not that good. I know I'm the black sheep of my family. Let's not talk about it. But to answer the question, I think as part of this NATO 2030, in which NATO also aims to become more global and more political besides being militarily strong, I think it's very clear that the Balkans are also very much a strategic region. Obviously, NATO has a history with the Balkans. It's not an easy one. It's quite a painful one, actually. And I think everyone is aware of that. And I don't think we have to be necessarily shy in saying that it is so. But I think even more so, given this history, there is additional impetus, conviction, I think, within NATO to ensure peace and as close relations as possible with Serbia and the other countries of the Western Balkans. I mean, North Macedonia is now a part of the alliance. I think that already says a lot. On the Russia and China thing that you, Jorgen, brought up, I think the idea is to also that Serbia deserves to have more offers on the table, not just offers from Russia and from China. So I think this is where the West has space to step up much more. And as regards China as a separate issue, I think as part of this NATO 2030, China is a really big player in terms of the reflection that NATO is going to have, because I think everyone sees that the Americans are putting a lot of pressure on Europe as well to be more tough on China, to act more on China, and I think it's bringing China also on much more on NATO's agenda. And I think it's a legitimate question, but it's a tricky one, because on the one hand, if NATO wants to have a say on what China does or doesn't do, or to limit potentially malicious Chinese activities from acquiring strategic companies to investing in strategic sectors, it cannot do that by itself, because it simply doesn't have the instruments to do that. For that, it needs to work with the EU. So again, a case for EU-NATO cooperation. Second, I think what NATO really has to think quite hard about is whether Asia or the Indo-Pacific will become an area of responsibility, given how US-China relations are evolving. And this, I think, all of these different questions certainly have or will have an impact on the countries in Europe, including the Western Balkans. So that was on NATO. Since military neutrality was brought up quite a lot, and fair enough, I wanted to maybe think a bit more broadly in terms of what military neutrality means today. If we look, for instance, in the EU, we see that Austria, as well as Ireland, are members of PESCO, which is a military integration framework. And this is quite interesting. And because I think it shows us that these countries, even though militarily neutral, have understood that you need to cooperate in order to face the threats that we are currently facing. So I think in this sense, Serbia shouldn't let itself be constrained by the term we are militarily neutral. I think we have to think a bit more broadly, because no country can face the threats that we are facing alone. It's a cliche that everyone says, but it's true. It's simply true. And I think the distinction between on the defense of NATO members as well as EU members who are not a part of NATO, has also triggered a discussion on the defense clauses that both organizations have. On the EU side, you have Article 42.7, which is essentially a mutual defense clause. And on NATO side, obviously, you have Article 5. And again, under the umbrella of EU-NATO cooperation, there's a lot of discussion on, first of all, when do these articles apply and what is the distinction between them? And I think this is also quite a strategic question for the Balkans. If we try to do a foresight exercise and try to envision possible future crises or conflicts of whatever nature, whether in the Balkans or in the wider area, I think it's an important question as well. And finally, since you brought up the coronavirus as well, I wanted to maybe highlight a different point, which is related more to the contribution of the armed forces during the coronavirus. So I think immediately after the virus started to ravage the continent, we've seen armed forces in the EU, but also in other countries, including in Serbia, and I know that because I read about it. We've seen the armed forces being mobilized quite a lot. In Europe, their activities ranged from, using military aircraft to evacuate or transport patients, distributing food, disinfecting public spaces, helping, supporting civilian authorities with medical capacity, with testing capacity, building hospitals, even psychological support. So all of these really incredible contributions, which I think served several purposes. First, it also showed our societies in each of our countries that the military is really there to help the country and its society during a crisis. And I think that's important because it reminds us why they're there, and that when you have a crisis, it's important to have a military at the ready with top-notch equipment. It really makes a difference. I think that's one important message. Another is that first of all, when money is tight, and second, when threats such as pandemics gain a security dimension, which most of them do these days, the civil-military nexus is extremely important, because threats such as pandemics and such as, hybrid warfare or climate change and its impact on international security, they cannot be addressed simply with military or simply civilian instruments. They have to be joined up. And here again, I come back to my rationale for deeper EU-NATO cooperation. So that was the final point I wanted to make on the coronavirus to broaden a bit the debate. Thanks.
Thank you, Tania. Maybe I can play it back to Mr. Tomić. I don't know if you want to make a reply, as Tania mentioned you in her comment.
I think Ms. Lațici, I think she pointed out some things that I more or less covered in my own address, which is the level of operational cooperation between the civil and military sector and exchange of operation and other things. When maybe she can understand me better now.
Public Serbia, in case of military neutrality and neutrality, I explained exactly that Serbia used the model which they use some countries also in the world. For example, I mentioned that United Arab Emirates and KCA, for example, they have special United Arab Emirates and KCA, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, they have a special agreement with China, which they call Petrol Union Agreement. But at the same time, they have a strategic relation with the United States, and especially according to these relations, we have now the agreement of future cooperation between Israel and United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, for example, like members of the GCC countries. But I will come back to Serbia. Serbia in this moment dominantly wants to be good cooperative factor for all the countries in Europe, especially I want to say with the neighbors countries. And I mentioned that in the future for us is very important this project which they will have NATO in your country, in Romania, especially in Constanța, and that we want to support all cases in this kind of activity what you will have. Why? Because Serbia will be, for example, a logistics center for your cases. This is our picture how we're looking on the cooperation with Romania in this moment, because Romania is in the same moment the member of NATO and member of European Union. And I mentioned the future cooperation between Serbia and the European Union and Serbia and NATO is something what is one of the main agenda for the Serbia, but especially in case when we want to present that our future relations needs to be basically on our perspective in which kind of the cooperation we want to have tomorrow. And I think that my answer is much more clear when I explain on English. Maybe it's much easier for you on one side. Sa druge strane,
on the other hand, I want to point out the fact that Serbia, and rest assured, Serbia will always be, just as it helped US pilots in the Second World War, where 513 pilots were rescued, which happened in no other country in Europe. I think there was a similar action in the Philippines, but fewer, say, rescued people. But we were the ones who saved US pilots. We had a long-standing cooperation, and I hope we will continue having this cooperation in the future with the United States, starting from the cooperation established by our large scientist, Mikhailo Pupin, who, together with Woodrow Wilson, established cooperation with the United States. And many mentioned this cooperation between Serbia and the United States, but I think it's as important for us to have cooperation with the European Union and good cooperation with NATO. We are a high-quality partner, which can be seen from the exercise Serbia 2018 in the Serbian municipality of Mladenovac, where, among other things, there was a form of civil-military cooperation applied between NATO members and Serbia. And this is where the rescue sector of the Ministry of Interior had the main role in this presentation of capacities of the Republic of Serbia in the security sense in the field of defense, and it cooperated with the military. So the military equivalent, so Ms. Tania, this element is always important in cooperation and in ensuring the security of some countries. This concept of the European armed forces, which some countries would like to develop, is primarily related to the fact that maybe some of them would like to preventively neutralize some things in their own countries. So by the time a soldier comes into the street, his visualization is much stronger than when you have a member of the police force or some other forces. So this visualization is important. I would like to wrap up with the fact that this profiling that has been developed in FBI, this profiling in cyberspace is important for all of us. Don't forget, Mr. Samso, that this profiling cost Norway very much in the case of Breivik, and it also was very detrimental to New Zealand. So profiling, exchange of information, continued process of monitoring the cyberspace and exchange of information is something that we have to tackle in the future. Just like this case in Vienna has showed that a lack of cooperation or understanding between the Slovak police and Austria, on the other hand, because both of them are members of the EU and NATO, so that is the Czech Republic, Slovak, and okay, there was a failure to communicate between security systems, and this can lead to horrible consequences, because I think the loss of human life is a horrible thing, and this altruism is something that we all try to do and to ensure in the future.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tomić, for those remarks. I think we cleared up a lot of space there also and covered some ground. I would like to maybe bring Mr. Aleksandar back in from the European Movement of Serbia, if he's still with us. I can tell you while we see if he comes back that unfortunately the ambassador has had to leave this conversation now. So now we're down to the three of you and me left we have about 13 minutes left. So, but I would like to play it over to Aleksandar if he is still with us from the European. Okay.
I am here, but camera is not working. You can't see me. We lost the video feed, but you can hear me, hopefully, still.
I will. It's good to have you. We'll live with you just in audio. Then I don't know. I think what I wanted to maybe bring up to you to answer some of them. I brought those kind of narratives forward about Serbia and the balancing act of being in between, having a leg in different camps and stuff, and maybe you can talk from your perspective about the narratives that exist about Serbia and their relationships vis-a-vis the European Union, vis-a-vis the West, vis-a-vis China and Russia, and maybe from your perspective can give us some insight in where you see those narratives play out, and maybe if we have a role in or we have an opportunity to change those narratives.
Again, I'm very sorry that we can't see each other, that you can't see me, but we've tried everything. Let me reiterate briefly. As a small country in a small region, we have no place to go but to a place where everyone is going in our region. We are Europe, geographically, historically, culturally, economically. It is in us, and we are in it. And there's no dilemma there, and this is not an issue. But on the other hand, European Union promised one Europe. Its reserve towards the Western Balkans, not only today, but in the past decades, is clear. Through the initiative of 3 Cs, you have the fact that Eastern Europe is reviving as a separate economic and political unit. So just like the Western Balkan region is expected to speak in one voice, this is expected from European Union too. Until European Union has an unstable region of Western Balkans, as long as it is unstable, it will not be able to deal with key long-term strategic positioning in these frameworks. How this will be changed, as in 2016, the election of Donald Trump changed the security architecture of the Western world, and Europe at that moment had to start thinking about itself. China became an economically ever stronger, Russia more present in some global frameworks. We will see what this revival of transatlantic and trans-Pacific cooperation that is expected with the arrival of Biden in 2021 can bring. But the key issue here is whether the Western Balkan region at this moment is closer to the European Union. My impression is that it is not, for several key reasons. The first being, from European Union, in the past years, dissonant tones are coming. The European Commission supports enlargement, has strategic documents, strong advocacy, but certain EU members constantly remove from the agenda this question, this issue. The reason for enlargement fears include increase in xenophobic nationalism and also opportunism of political leaders in those countries. At the same time, what I said at the beginning, unless we try hard to be on the EU agenda as a positive example, they will keep wanting to brush us aside, and it's up to us. And I, again, would like to say that any activity in terms of regional integration and regional initiatives is more than welcome. Power and influence of European Union in the Western Balkans is based on credibility of enlargement policy. This credibility requires better tools that would lead to changes on the ground. For years, we have been talking about transformative power of EU integration process, but in fact, if you go through Western Balkans, you can see that this transformation in many areas is lacking. And third, and this is related to your question, in international relations, there is no vacuum. Insufficient engagement of the European Union in the past years and decades opened room for more significant presence of other actors who were and are and will be present only at different levels: Russia, Turkey, China, the Arab Emirates, and that are rarely mentioned. And in past years, European Union is doing little to combat this geopolitical penetration of these countries. If European Union is unable to offer clear vision, social vision for the Balkan periphery, for 15, 16 million people, the question then arises how it can position itself as a relevant global actor in the new global order. And if you watched pre-election campaign in the US, you saw that the narrative that came was that new global scene has its triangle at the top US and at the bottom Moscow and Beijing, not mentioning Europe. And the fourth, what I already mentioned, this several decades process of EU accession, the enlargement fatigue, companies' reform fatigue, and this is a dangerous, very dangerous phenomenon. Serbia initiated its European path in 2001. European Union is mentioned in the expose of the Prime Minister Đinđić now, almost 20 years later. In 2021 is mentioned in a strategic document of the European Commission from February 2018. And it seems to me that nobody is ready to repeat 2025. It was an encouragement. It was a matter of this moment, and then that was all it was. If you look at performance of all Western Balkan societies in this process in the past 24 months, it is quite disappointing. But at the same time, it is also encouraging from the point of view of Northern Macedonia. And then you get a cold shower in the form of Bulgarian veto on green light and final opening of negotiations. This is not the first time. You remember that Zaev's government was forced into elections after the signing of Prespa agreement with Bulgaria, without a promise, on the other hand, a promise from the European Union. So the key thing for me was how to bring back the credibility of the European Union, how to restore it in the Western Balkans. Enlargement is an opportunity, and it isn't, and it shouldn't be a risk. And enlargement is the issue of enlargement always went hand in hand with the resolution of crisis. I will remind you, the entry of Portugal and Spain was delayed by 1 year because of budget rule reform in the European Union. Enlargement in 2004 happened only after the Nice agreement came into force in 2003. So the tones that came and are still present from the European Union, that Europe first has to deal with itself, to arrive at redefinition of relations within the European Union, and only then can it be ready and able to accept new members and to more actively deal with the enlargement policy as the most successful policy in the past decades. I think that's very dangerous. These two processes, the process of redefinition in the Western Balkans and in Europe, are two parallel processes. They are complementary, do not exclude each other. Quite the contrary, they complement each other. So this fear and frequent mention of China and Russia this is irrational, and from the point of view of Brussels, it is more present at times when Brussels actually is not able to offer anything concrete to the Western Balkan region. The new methodology that has been offered is okay, it is accepted by Serbia, that is already in the negotiation process, but political will of key importance, political will on the side of Brussels and Western Balkans. Without it, we can adopt dozens of new methodologies with new frameworks of the EU accession process, but we will remain at the same place. And this gives an argument to those forces that I believe, I'm afraid, are increasingly numerous. It doesn't matter how which part of the public supports in the Western Balkan. You should do a comparative analysis and increase in percentage of the part of population that is explicitly against. And I'm talking about Serbia when it comes to the European Union. Any delay, any prolonging and stalling of the process, comparison with Turkey, that on the one hand is the distinction was made in 2018 between Western Balkans and Turkey, but among citizens, when you nothing else, they see nothing else. They see that we are in the same vacuum as Turkey. So this stalling, I'm afraid, can make the European agenda pointless, continuing. So then if things continue as in the past 2 decades, thank you.
Thank you for that. Those remarks. It was. I think we're running out of time, but I think I want to just give 1 minute to Tania and 1 minute to Mr. Tomić for final remarks. And first over to you, Tania.
Okay, thanks. So very quickly, I think what I briefly wanted to pick up from what Alexa said is the challenge or the message that EU disunity sends abroad and sends to its partners, because I think it's a very important point. So indeed, the EU speaking with one voice, it's an issue, and our disadvantage, as democratic societies, is that we do it in front of everyone. We do it full exposure, covered by all your colleagues, Jorgen. It's an issue. Of course, it's an issue, but this is why we're trying now to advance more towards strategic convergence, towards a common strategic culture. This is what we call now, and the process for this, as I mentioned, is the strategic compass. So I hope you'll join me in this hope that this process will help us do better in that. Now, as for Serbia's integration into or partnerships with both NATO and the EU, I want to just reiterate what I said, that the process of talking these things through and engaging in each of these different projects that I've suggested, from the European Defence Fund to engaging with PESCO members, they are as important as the end of Serbia 2025 in itself. So I think this is something that we have to keep in mind. The journey is as important as the destination itself. So that's all from me. Hvala lepo.
Hvala također.
Thank you.
Just quickly, if Mr. Tomić has a minute of last remarks, otherwise I will hand it over to the next panel. Mr. Tomić.
I would like to thank, first of all, the CEAS and for this opportunity to speak at the conference today, and Ms. Milić, the fearless fighter for Serbia, bringing Serbia closer to NATO and the European Union. And on the other hand, I would like to invite all the participants today to a major conference that will be organized by the American University, dedicated to the in the area of security and cooperation. And many topics that were initiated here will move to the Middle East. And during this minute, I would like to say, do not forget, Serbia is a European country, and it will always be one. And you can always count on Serbia. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tomić, for that final remark, and also for invitation, and for thanking our fearless Jelena Milić. I think on that note, I would like to thank the panelists for their contributions, and quickly move over, because time is running, quickly move over to Terry Schultz,